let's look first at the big picture, and then we'll get into some of the specifics, which are also very interesting. And Brad, I'm going to start with you. How is climate change already costing our country?
Well, it's already costing our country enough that it's a pocketbook issue for taxpayers, municipalities, and the federal government. What we have in terms of climate impacts that are already here, extreme heat, extreme weather in the Northeast, a more than 70% increase in intense rains when you get more than an inch or two over a 24-hour period, that's really overwhelming infrastructure. And so you have, for example, you have towns, coastal towns, now very closely documenting the additional costs they're having to incur because of rising seas, more intense storms, and you have stormwater management infrastructure that's being overwhelmed. So you have, here in New Hampshire, you have municipalities that have struggled for years with the costs of achieving the nitrogen reductions that have to occur in order to restore the health of Great Bay. That problem is being amplified by those more intense rains that are carrying more nutrients and other pollution into our waters. Those waters are warmer, and so the impact of those nutrients is amplified because it's a perfect petri dish for algae blooms that is generated by those nutrients, and obviously the impacts of that in turn on all of the economic activity that surrounds a great natural treasure like Great Bay is affected as well. So we're really seeing municipalities struggling, states the same in terms of the costs of response and helping municipalities prepare for more extreme weather. We're going to see and are starting to see from extreme heat, more health-related illness, particularly in areas that have heat islands, where the impact of extreme heat is intensified. Places like Manchester that have very limited tree cover, even though they're northern, they're still very subject to those impacts. And so it's a problem that's here, just like the extreme weather is here. It's going to be increasingly a burden for taxpayers, and it's one of the reasons why it's so appropriate that the Concord Coalition is elevating this issue here. It's kind of what I think of as the budget hawks of advocacy. This is an important issue. It extends not just to those local and state impacts, but when you get to the federal budget, and you've probably read lots of screaming headlines about the national debt lately, you've got costs of disaster response, costs and the implicit subsidies of federal flood insurance that's actually encouraging development in the wrong places. So even as we should be retreating from the places most exposed to extreme weather, we're actually subsidizing development in those places. And at the federal level, and certainly pertinent to Concord Coalition's work, most disaster response is treated as an emergency appropriation.
So a one-time
deal, but no scrutiny of whether we should have an offset, what the budget impact is, whether we should raise taxes. And so it's, if you're a budget hawk, you really should be a climate hawk.
Right. Well, and that's a big comprehensive list. Disaster insurance, impacts on natural amenities, recovery from storms, public health. Anything else, Pat, that you would add to that list in terms of the financial costs and the budgetary costs that we're seeing?
Well, it's be gilding the lily, I think, but the impact on natural systems should be recognized. The Gulf of Maine, for example, is the body of water that's warming faster than any other body of water on Earth. Think about that for a minute. And the consequence of that is, there's this big controversy between the lobster fishermen in Massachusetts and Maine particularly, and the right whale, which is the most critically endangered whale species on Earth, only about 300 of them left. And what I was telling the lobstermen recently, though they didn't want to hear this, is that's not your biggest problem. The biggest problem is that the lobsters are going north and entire ecosystems are shifting to the north. So the lobster fishery has already left most of the Atlantic coast. And the one that's still in the Gulf of Maine is leaving as well. So it's going to Canada right now. The entire ecosystem of the Atlantic Ocean and oceans around the world in response to warming and acidification is completely changing the marine ecosystem. That's happening now. And very, very tiny amounts of increase in carbonic acid in the oceans causes massive impacts on the base of the food chain. It attacks, get this, shell-forming organisms. What might those be, right? So you're talking about, in our context, billions of dollars. In the global context, hundreds of billions of dollars, nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, some of the things that Brad is talking about are right here and now in our face, but other things that are happening are not that far away.